Hey guys, so I put this channel together in order to start the conversations, these tough conversations about race and how we as a society interact with each other. I've seen a lot of comments and a lot of conflicting information about black people and white people getting together to talk about racism, to talk about systemic injustices and things of that sort. And it's a really tough conversation to start having with people. So I figured I would get some of my friends together and just start the conversation. My friends and I have been lucky enough and blessed enough that we interact and we have a good relationships, whether my black friends or my white friends or whomever. So I just wanted to kind of get everybody together and start these tough conversations and to see ultimately if we can give some recommendations from both sides on how to drive reconciliation. So hope you enjoy the video. I've got a couple of friends on board right now, so please feel free to take a look and hope you enjoy the show. So, I guess in general, how have these recent events and experiences changed you or changed your opinion on things? Like, how are you feeling about everything?
I think that definitely seeing everything play out made me question, am I doing enough to support the Black community? Because I've always been, you know, pro anti life, not anti, I've always been pro Black Lives Matter. And I've always understood like what that is about versus people who say all lives matter and like all of the like blue lives matter, like all of that. I was always in support of the protesters, but I definitely think that it's made me question, should I be donating more? Should I be, I don't know, in some way drawing awareness to white people since I am white and I have that audience already? Like, what are some different types of ways that I can advocate for the Black community that maybe I wasn't really doing enough before? So I think that's what's
Okay.
changed the most, is making me think, what more could I be doing? Because I already feel that I'm anti racist, but you
Right.
can't just stop there. You know, you have to get other people on the same path as you.
Right. Right. No, that's a good perspective. That's a great question. And like I said, I didn't think about it from that perspective either. And I think for me too, similar to that, when I looked at just the way things were going, growing up, I knew there was racism, but I didn't know to this degree racism. Like I never thought twice about going for a jog, but then all of a sudden, I see people getting killed from jogs and going outside. I'm just like, wow, this is a lot stranger than I thought it was. So that's what's been kind of interesting to me. But no, that's a great perspective on things, and like I said, maybe all of us, can look at doing more things in the future and things like that. Why do you think people have so much hatred? Like I've been noticing that on the news myself, is that people are really amped up when it comes to races and things like that. When I grew up, I used to look at other races and say, "Oh, that person's different. That person's different." So I wonder, and it was more like a wondering kind of thing. But I never understood the degree of hatred people have for not only black people but other people in general. So, do you? I mean, I don't know what your opinion on it. Obviously, you don't feel that way, but have you, heard of this from other people, or what? I guess what's your perspective on that? I guess.
I think that until more recently, I never like really could understand how someone can be racist, like what the thought process is or anything. But I very fortunately wasn't raised that way, so I also don't have that type of my mom thinks this, my dad thinks this, so that has to be correct. But I do have other family members who most definitely are racist, whether they would admit it or not. And I still know that they're in the wrong, you know? And I'd like to think I would think that whether my parents raised me this way or not. But I think the more I read about being anti racist or trying to view the white perspective of someone who actually is racist, I think it's just a fear of losing privilege. I think a lot of this has to do with, if white people are at the top, they don't want to make room for everybody to be level.
Hmm. Okay.
And
Okay.
And I feel like that drives a lot of it is just fear of losing what you already have. Because if you look way back in time with slavery, white people had complete control.
Mhm.
And now, you know, it's institutionalized. So it's not as directly noticeable, but
Yeah.
it's still a hierarchy of power. And I think that with all of this, like, people are just afraid of losing power.
Ah,
It's
okay.
just greed. Like, to me at least, a lot of it seems just to be out of greed. Like, this is the way things have always been, and this is the way I want things to continue. Because what's going to happen to me when it's just as easy for a Black person or a Hispanic person to become president of the United States or to become a lawyer or this or that? Like, when everybody has the same opportunities, or let's say I get pulled over and I definitely get a ticket and I used to not get a ticket or something, like, just like silly, like pointless kind of things like that, where it's just like you have that power and to have it being taken from you is scary, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in the situation with the getting pulled over, if we're being honest though, everybody who, if you're not in the wrong, then you should just be like pulled over, talked to, and you and the police officer leave. So it's really not a it shouldn't be viewed as a privilege to have a normal interaction with a police officer. So like, white people shouldn't be afraid of other people having normal experiences like that, because
Sure.
that's just how it should be, you know? So some of it makes, like, isn't even rational to be scared about, and in my personal opinion, but like other parts of it, I guess that's where they're coming from, but
Yeah.
I don't really know.
Well, no, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that kind of reminds me of the interactions I've had with police before, and I've had maybe 4 or 5 instances where I got pulled over or questioned by a police officer. I would say like 1 out of 5 were like a positive experience because it was like, oh, I made a left turn in Arizona one time, and I was like, crap, I'm lost. I made a left turn. It was illegal. Police pulled me over and just said, well, you're lost, so we'll just give you a warning. Go ahead, no problem. And we smiled and laughed about it, no problem. But yeah, some of the other police, instances, I've never had guns drawn or anything like that, but I just remember the energy was just really intense. It was like, where are you going? What are you doing here? It's like, I'm just driving to work. Like, what are you okay? Like, why are you so amped up? So it was just a weird kind of experience, I guess. Kind of dealing with that. Um, have you ever experienced any racism towards you, like from other races? Or
I think I really haven't. Um, and I don't know if my parents have either, or anyone like close to me,
Mhm.
but I just like nothing really comes to mind at all.
Yeah, no, that's
When
that's
you
a good thing actually. Yeah.
when instance that stands out a lot in your life of something that has happened to you?
I've had about 9 or 10, I guess. Some were a little less, intense. Other ones were very intense. The worst one I had was, and I don't know if I ever told you guys this, but I got a hate letter from like a KKK guy or something like that, and it would had the N word written all over it, and it was weird because it was just I think he had seen me on television. It was for winning a small scholarship for going to college, and got the letter, and I was just like, I thought it was like a weird joke or something. First, I'm looking at it, and I had to stare at it for like 10 or 20 seconds. Like, is this real? Like, somebody actually did this? So, what was weird to me is that not only from the standpoint of being racist and having the N word and all kinds of obscenities written across the letter, what was the strangest thing to me was like somebody actually took the time to type this out and put the borders around it, put the red letters, and print it out, put a postage stamp on it, and that was what was weird to me. I was like, you actually took the time to do all of that. And so I kind of looked at it differently. Everybody else around me was like raving and upset, like, how dare this person do this? But my technical brain was like, why would you want to waste your time doing this? This is so strange to me. So that was the worst experience. And then I've had a couple with the police and things like that. So, but yeah, over the years, and I've had the typical, being followed around the store and questioned, what are you doing here? I'm like, well, I was shopping, but I guess I'll leave now because you're being weird. So yeah, just a lot of interesting experiences.
So how do you normally respond to like the microaggressions? So the moments that are like somebody following you around the store and not as intense as that letter, let's say, but just like every day, like certain things like, oh, you went to college, or just like really
Oh yeah.
like racially aggressive comments that are sometimes masked as being like not a big deal, or I don't really feel this way, but it makes a statement, about how they actually view you
Hmm.
or your race.
Yeah, no, it does happen every now and then, and I think the best thing people can do is just, and this is just my own personal advice, is just treat people like people. Don't, I mean, obviously you can see that somebody's black or somebody's white or whatever, but don't focus on that for the whole conversation. If you notice somebody's white or notice somebody's black, okay, that's great. Yeah, let's move on from that. But just treat the person like a person. And I've had instances where I've talked to people and, oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Detroit. And, oh, wow, do you guys have drive-by shootings every day? I'm like, no. Like, what are you talking about? So it's always like a, kind of a stigma. I'm supposed to talk a certain way or act a certain way, and that kind of thing. But ultimately, and this is what's so funny, that my friends and I, when we were growing up, none of us acted like you see on movies and things like that. But I think the media drives so much and movies drive so much that they paint a picture of the way black people should act and the way Chinese people should act, and this, that, and the other. And it's really not true. I mean, it's like 80%. I mean, obviously, kids will have slang and they talk a certain way and that kind of thing, but it's so like overblown when it comes to reality. Reality says, like, hey, I'm speaking perfect English. I have a degree. We're having a normal conversation, just like when our conversations, with me, you, and Sarah, it's normal. It's not like, but then some people, yeah, they approach you and it's like, oh, obviously you like hip hop, and I'm like, not really. I like jazz, but I don't really get into hip hop that much. So it's always like you said, kind of like a micro, or just like a very small way of thinking about people, and it's like that's really not true. So, yeah, yeah. Now, and that was one of the main drivers for starting the series. Why do you think people are so uncomfortable talking about race in general?
I think on the white perspective, there's certain people who maybe actually do feel guilty when certain topics are addressed, like guilty about having privilege, guilty about, the history of what white people in America specifically have done to people of color, like Black, Native American, Hispanic, like every race. So I think to some extent, some people might realize that, and they're like, oh, but I didn't personally do that. And so they don't want to confront these different racial issues.
Sure.
If you were to confront them, that's how you would make an impact. And then I, I would assume, coming from the perspective of a person of color, that it's tough because it's painful experiences that you have every day. So some people might want to talk about race and be very upset and want to get all of their feelings out there to make some sort of change. And I could see on the other hand, and I have some friends like this too, who don't want to talk about it because maybe there is too much trauma there
Hmm.
and it's just too personal to deal with, and that's understandable. But I think definitely on the white side of things, we have to get over it. Like whether I owned a slave or not, like I am the symbol of white privilege. And I am very privileged in other ways as well. And so I have to be aware of that. I have to address that.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm comfortable talking about it. And I think
Yeah.
there's some things that you don't even realize are privilege until you're talking to someone about it. So that's why it's so good to have these kind of conversations to say, "Oh, I never even thought about how you experience this way, and for me it's like no big deal. It's not a problem."
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. And I would even
Even say too, like from both perspectives, I think, like you said, basically just sitting down and talking through things. I think that's the best first step. I mean, like I said, I know we talked casually about some things before, and this is a lot more detailed than where we've ever gone. But it's definitely like just sitting down and kind of getting that perspective and getting those insights from all parties. I think that's really important. The other thing too, I think you had touched on was basically talking through the privilege thing. I hear that a lot, white privilege, this, that, and the other thing. Um, and I would even challenge both sides. It's like don't get hung up on white privilege. There is white privilege that exists, but similar to where I'm talking to Jenna, she's a friend of ours. I'm not gonna like bash her head over with it and be like, hey, you white privilege. So she already realizes that that does exist, and obviously, she doesn't try to capitalize on it, but it's there, and it's just reality. So the sooner you sit, the sooner you sit down and talk it through, and talk about the frustrations and talk about the ways of healing, I think that's the way that you go forward, and ultimately start to progress. For everybody's sake. So feel discriminated against. I've heard something like this before, like in articles and things like that, but I didn't know how much of a information or I didn't really know that much information on it. But ultimately, do white people feel discriminated against, like in society?
I don't know about in general, and I've personally never felt discriminated against, but I've definitely heard or read a lot of white people complain about affirmative action, saying that, oh, that takes away my opportunities to go to this college or get this job. But I think they just don't fully understand like what affirmative action is, because it's still allowing for the majority, that which is white, to be hired or to attend a university. So it's not
Right.
like if a person of color gets into Yale, it's impossible for me to get into Yale. It was already easier for me to get into.
Yeah.
So I've heard that a lot, and it's, once again, it just sounds like people being afraid of losing power.
Hmm.
And I guess if you're racist and you see more people of color going to the same like prestigious college as you, I guess that's like painful for you to deal with because you don't
Yeah.
like diversity. But you got to get over that because that's a messed up mindset to have in the first place. But
Yeah.
day to day, um, like life, I don't really know if white people do feel discriminated against.
Hmm.
And if they do, I would more so assume that it's racist people being offended by perhaps the way a person of color might treat them indifferently at the most. Because I've never really been treated harshly for being white, maybe indifferently, just not as conversational with me versus my my friends that might be black or Hispanic or something like that. Like you might be more talkative with them. But also, if I was a person of color, I would probably naturally assume that, oh, I don't know if this white person is cool or if she's racist. So
Yeah.
I don't wouldn't take any of that personally. So I don't know too much about white people who take like little things personally,
Hmm.
or is where they've like experienced racism. But
Yeah.
And you know, it's funny you should say that. I'm guilty of that myself because every and I and it's no, you know, not trying to be offensive or anything like that, but every white person I meet, I have that thought. It's like, okay, are you cool? Are you weird? Let me make sure. Let me. I'm trying to gauge what I'm dealing with, basically. And like I said, most of the time, it's like I can pick up on it right away. But yeah, I've had situations where I'm like, oh hey, how's it going? And people are just like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, okay, well, guess I'll just keep going now. So, but yeah, so, and I think you hit it perfectly too, where you were talking about affirmative action. I've, you know, looked at that as well, and I always scratch my head too because I'm looking at it. I'm like, okay, black people are like 15% of the total population. You still have more opportunities. So I don't understand like what the concern is or whatever. But yeah, what you said was perfect. I was like, I was kind of thinking the same thing. So um, yeah, no, that's pretty good stuff. And then ultimately too, I've had the you know been blessed and fortunate enough to travel around the world. Like I said, I've been to China, Japan, you know, here in the States, been to California, New York, and kind of lived at these places for periods of time. And like I said, once you boil it down and really look at it, the thing that I keep coming back to is that people, a lot of people are very similar. You know, like I said, when I talk to my Chinese friends, we're joking and laughing about stuff that I would same the same way with my black friends or my white friends. So it's very, you know, it's very interesting that some people don't have that same sort of knowledge and perspective and things like that. So
Yep.
what
So,
would you say to someone who doesn't believe in white privilege? Like, have you ever experienced that where you're talking to a white person and they don't believe that they have privilege?
yeah, and I think it's a matter of understanding. I mean, you pretty much have the perspective. Some people think, and I've had to explain something like this to my colleagues as well, is that some people think like, oh, all this racism stuff is made up. It doesn't exist. I'm like, no, it's there. Trust me, it's there. um, but I would say I haven't had to do it often, but I think a lot of it is just trying to give a better understanding of what we mean by white privilege. White privilege doesn't mean that you have more money or you have more things or not even opportunity, but it's more like, hey, you can go for a job without worrying about getting murdered. You know, because of your skin tone.
Exactly.
You know, that's really what it's all about. Hey, you can go to a store, you can get pulled over by the police and not have an automatic, you know, because when I've gotten pulled over by police, I almost felt like they were looking to see what was wrong. And when they couldn't find anything, I almost thought like they were shocked. And I'm like, what are you looking for? I don't have anything. Like, what are you looking for? You know? So it's not about, you know, I could, let's say, for example, if I had more money and I was, you know, a movie star or an athlete or whatever, I could have more, like, you know, like a star athlete would have more financially and that kind of thing. That's not, it's not really a monetary thing. What we're talking about when we say white privilege is again just more the non-monetary things. It's like, hey, you can go to a park with your kids. Nobody's going to come question you about if you have a barbecuing permit or whatever. You know, some of the strange stuff you see online with the Karens of the world and things like that. That's really what it's all about. So, no offense to anybody named Karen, but that's what they're calling people now. Karen, I don't know why, but so yeah, but it's definitely out there, and unfortunately, racism exists. And to me, you know, it's very deep rooted and like almost like I don't know, it's just like a deep rooted hatred because again, I've seen clips online and experience not quite to that extreme online, but the things that I'm seeing online as well as some in person is just very um, it's very interesting, but then also very odd to see people that have so much hatred for something. Like the type of hatred I have during a sporting event when my team is losing is the type of thing that I see with people just from looking at somebody else, and I'm like, dude, like if the Pistons are losing, yeah, you want to be that upset. You don't want to be that upset if just somebody's walking down the street and you can see them walking down the street. It's like that's just weird to me. I'm like, calm down.
So,
You know, that kind of
as
thing.
a father of a biracial child, do you have any fears that, let's say my parents didn't have raising me, particularly maybe in terms of cops, like getting pulled over, or honestly just being out, and if somebody called the cops on her just for, living her life, doing normal everyday things, but having a darker skin tone?
Hmm.
Mhm. Yeah, I am. Lately, and lately, I am a lot more. Because to me, it's a timing thing. You know, I was alive during the Rodney King riots and things like that. I'm in my early 40s now, and I remember there was a time where this was happening, and then throughout time there was a little bit of stuff, but not really anything that extremely bad. But then 2012 came and Trayvon Martin got killed, and then this person got killed and that person got, and it was like all these people. I've literally lost track of everybody who's died since Trayvon Martin back in like 2012. But now, um, because people have cell phone cameras and there's cameras everywhere, it's like all this stuff that was already there from even 30, 40 years ago, and obviously back further, is coming to light now. And that's what's most disturbing because I guess before cell phones, I was kind of fortunate enough not to have as many really, really harsh experiences as other people. So in my mind, oh, things are getting better, racism is getting better, and maybe that's what other people's perspectives are as well. So I thought, okay, things are getting a lot better, and you don't hear as much. But then, sure enough, as soon as cell phone cameras start coming out, you see all these deaths like over and over and over and over, and the excuses and the reasoning for killing people is just unbelievable to me. Like I looked at documentaries and research on other countries and Canada, Sweden, and all these other places, and it's more there. It's more like a, hey, let's try to reform the person. Let's try to help the person out. It's not like, hey, this person did one thing wrong. Obviously, we need to murder him now. It's like, no, what? Like, try to help the person. Like, why would you? To me, your last thought should be murdering somebody or shooting somebody, not your first thought. That's what's troubling to me because I look at these situations, whether it's police or racist people or whatever, and I'm like, your first thought is to start shooting? Like, the thought of that is just ridiculous. But now we have to think about it.
With that being said, because I definitely agree that I think a lot of people felt like racism was dying down in a sense because we weren't like hearing and seeing these things. But now that, like you said, people are literally filming people being killed by police
Yeah.
for things that are should have never escalated to that point at all. Or in the case of Breonna Taylor, they weren't even at the right house, so it
Yeah.
was completely an innocent, like no crime whatsoever was committed. Like all of that being said, when, if ever, will this stop being an issue?
Yeah, well, and I think that's a great question. I think, like I said, it's just about educating people, giving people knowledge on other races. Obviously, there's plenty of resources online, like the blue eye, brown eye experiment. That's one, and just looking online, doing some research. The history of racism and slavery and everything like that is very, very warped and evil in itself. I mean, that would be a starting point. I would suggest. And even myself, I learn stuff every day, and I'm just like, wow, I didn't even know they did that back during the slave days, or something will pop up. So definitely getting the knowledge and understanding of what slavery is, what racism is, and then I would say also you have to look at your own heart. The reason I say that is that there are people who it's almost like I think racism eats them up. Like they're so amped up and hateful. It's like I think they're losing sight of reality. Like if you're a racist person and you have so much hate, that hate starts to control you. So you're not even in control of your own self anymore. And when you start getting to the point where you literally want to murder somebody because of the way they look, not only are you going down a dangerous path for being hateful and racist, but you could get killed, you could go to jail, and not to be, biblical about it, but God don't like ugly. So if you have that much hatred inside of you and it's controlling you like that, you got to do some self checks because at the end of the day, you know, everybody is human. Everybody bleeds the same way, and to have that type of hatred, I think that's what you got to let go. You have to hone in on whatever you hate and just find a way to let it go. Get some knowledge about who you hate and that kind of thing. And I guarantee you'll find that a lot of people are pretty much the same, you know? So it's about getting that knowledge and just letting go of the hate. And even, and I would even go out on a limb and say this. Even if somebody doesn't like me, my neighbors could not like me. I don't care. That's fine. If you don't like me, that's fine. What gets ridiculous though is the fact that you literally think about murdering somebody because you don't like them. That's insane. That's psychopathic way to think.
Right.
That's not normal. so so that's what's very interesting, I guess. Um, have you experienced differences with people, living, I guess, in Georgia versus living other places, or like, I guess, from Caucasian perspective, have you experienced similarities or differences? Are some people like more city people are like more strange when it comes to racism, or is it, I guess, what's your perspective on that?
I definitely think that in like particular parts of Georgia, it's a lot harder to find people who aren't racist or aren't, supporters of Trump. Like, not that that has to be political, but, different like things that you definitely don't have in common with someone is pretty typical, like around where I live, but where I work or where I spend a lot of my time, like more towards Atlanta, I think there's a lot more like understanding and compassion, anti-racist
Hmm.
like opinions, but I guess the problem is that still people in power don't feel that way. So even if the people living there feel that way, if the people who are policing other people feel that way, then it's like the effects are still going to be felt. But I also think that people used to be a bit more subtle with their racism.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that there's people, like, for instance, someone I went to high school with that I never would have suspected would say anything like this. He just posted on Facebook that George Floyd deserved to die
Wow.
and put a lot of scripture to support and justify his belief,
Mhm.
and just turned everything into this racist evangelical propaganda that just didn't make any sense. So I think
Wow.
some people are starting to reveal their true selves during this. Maybe people are irritated about the protests because they don't support them and they don't understand the movement.
Hmm.
So I think there are more people who are comfortable sharing their opinions on it. So maybe people you didn't even realize, like me with that one person,
Yeah.
feel that way. So it does make you start to wonder how many more people do I know or have I met that also feel that way? And
Yeah.
sometimes I tend to just assume that a white person could be a little racist or very racist until I like actually talk to them and get to know them, and then I'm like, okay, thank God you're, like me in a
So you
way.
have to
Like
do that
you
too.
just have,
Okay.
you just have like a basic understanding. No, yeah, I always assume that a white person might not agree with something I would say, like in support of this or that type of movement. Also with like DACA, so like
Yeah.
immigration issues and all of those type of things. Like I just assume they might not be a fan of it, but I usually still say what I think anyway because I feel like it shouldn't be controversial to say that you support, human beings having rights. But
Sure.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the videos. Please feel free to like and subscribe at the bottom. And please leave your comments. We want to hear from you. We want to hear about ways of reconciliation. And we also want to hear about subject matter you want to talk about on the show. So give us a shout, like, subscribe, comment.